56 different artists from all sorts of different countries, lots of different perspectives, and so much of the work engages with or otherwise shows language. It's literally in another language, or I think shows the importance of language to understand and to accommodate human migration, basically.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language,
Leah Sweet discusses the current exhibit on global migration and movement at Cornell's Johnson Museum of Art. Plus, we discuss the value of museums for language learning.
We're back for a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's Media Development Manager. Today, we have Leah Sweet in the studio with us. Leah is the Lynch Curatorial Coordinator for academic programs at the Herbert F. Johnson Museum of Art on Cornell's campus.
We will discuss how museums can be integrated into language teaching and hear more about the current Johnson exhibition of contemporary art about the movement of people across the globe. Welcome to Speaking of Language, Leah.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into all the work that you do at the Johnson working with educators and this current exhibition, can you share with us a little bit about your background with languages? What languages do you speak? How did you learn them?
Sure. Language for me has been something very deliberate that I've sought out in my life. I think the first foreign language that I started learning was when I was 12, and I started taking French.
Okay.
And I just fell in love. And so I speak French, German, I know Spanish, and I know some Russian.
Nice.
And it's all from classroom instruction.
Okay.
But then also as a prelude to going to those countries, and really that's how I've learned how to speak those languages. I mean, having the structure and everything is really helpful, but for me, learning a language only comes from immersion, really.
Yeah. Do you utilize any of those languages in your work right now, or have you in the past?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so as an art historian, you have to know German and at least one other language to do graduate work. And for me, my field is modern and contemporary German art. I spent a lot of time in Germany right after college on a fellowship through the Bosch Stiftung, the Bosch Foundation. And that level of language knowledge, going back to Germany to do doctoral dissertation work, I had access to things that I could never have thought if I didn't have that language ability. And moreover, I don't think I could have formulated the direction and focus of my dissertation if I hadn't been able to thoroughly research German-speaking sources as well.
Sure, yeah. Great, dear listeners, and this is one of the many reasons why we learn languages.
Yay. So how did your interest in art history develop?
So I was a French major as an undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania, and I spent my junior year abroad in Paris, which was just phenomenal.
Nice.
It was wonderful. And part of that wonderfulness was actually there were quite a few French art history classes taught in French that I took, and talk about having the opportunity to take medieval art and architecture, and you're literally going around to like Moissac and Vézelay and, Autun and all the other like Romanesque abbeys and cathedrals, and not to mention, other ones as well. Or you're, learning about Impressionism, and you're just like, oh, let's go to the Musée d'Orsay and check it out. And I just thought, wow, this is the best. And so it really took what I loved about language is the traveling, the knowing about different ways of thinking about the world, different ways of describing and conceptualizing the world. And then there were amazing pictures and objects to go with it as well. And it really, that just sparked, and I knew 100% junior year left Paris thinking, yep, I'm definitely going to be an art historian.
Nice. Oh, that's wonderful. So how did you end up then at the Johnson here at Cornell?
So I was faculty at the new school for a while, both as an adjunct and as an assistant professor. And I really loved, of course, teaching and working with the students. But what I missed a lot was the reach, I guess. It seemed limited. I had wonderful students in my classes, but I only taught certain classes and only had certain students to work with. And I found that what I loved the most was collaborating with other professors in other schools at the new school on projects that were interdisciplinary. And so I missed, even though I was working on my own kind of research at the time, I really missed being amongst objects in the museum.
Okay.
And I had never really thought that I wanted to be in a museum. I very decidedly took an academic track that would put me into the academy as opposed to a museum per se. But the Johnson Museum is an academic museum, so it is absolutely the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little more about the role of museums in education, especially museums on university campuses?
So, yeah, I mean, an academic museum is definitely a different beast than, say, the Met or something like that, in that we are part of Cornell. So we are a teaching institution as well as a research institution, and our job is to really be both a resource on campus and also a driver of conversations as well. And I think one of the ways that we are really critical to learning all across campus is grounding active learning with object-based learning as well.
Yeah.
So there's really something magical that happens when you take students out of the classroom, you bring them to the museum, and they're confronted with an object that might be centuries old or it might be made last year.
Yeah.
And the kind of text that they're reading in the classroom and the things that they're thinking about theoretically, to confront them with often something that is in itself a document of history, but to understand that in a different way and to help someone pick that apart. I mean, I often say we're taught, especially in the American system, how to read an essay, how to write about a novel, even how to read a poetry.
Yeah.
But we're not really taught how to intellectually engage with objects, let alone images, even though I guess certainly visual literacy is something that is being fostered quite a bit more than, say, when I was in high school. And so it's really wonderful to let students come into a museum and say, you know, you bring perspective and knowledge and experience. And instead of running to the label to understand what this is, to first stop and encounter it and see what you can make of it and to give them the tools for that. And then to walk through maybe other sources that tell us more information is really meaningful. And having the students come to conclusions or understand an object with prompts instead of me just telling them about it, I think really solidifies a lot of the experience that they have in a very fresh and different way.
Yeah, that's great. So since we are a podcast about languages and language learning and teaching, how can exhibitions or objects be integrated specifically into language teaching and learning? Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the departments, the language programs that you have worked with here on campus, and what activities you suggest that people do or what you've seen, what professors have done?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we work with every school on campus. You know, you name it, they've been to the Johnson Museum, which is really wonderful. And I think for language classes specifically, what's been really great is in the past 2 years, we've switched from doing a more we'll take you around and show you. So if you're in a French class, we're going to show you works by French artists. And I'm, as the guide, may or may not speak French, but I'm going to tell you about this culturally, to switching to a model that is more instructor-driven on the day of the visit, but is prepared with me, essentially, so that the class can take place in the language it's supposed to.
Nice, yeah.
And that the objects can be used as prompts to really, at any level. I have a whole bunch of activities that I've been working on, and I'm really hoping to develop more for language instruction. Everything from informal activities that encourage students to use descriptive language and then to think about their choices and then how that has affected their description, to using the work to, so for example, a class that we had come in that was reading something about like existential and post-war French theory and such. And we have a wonderful Dubuffet painting that is, La Bouche en Croissant. And it really is this kind of mask, of course, for him, very mask-like. You can't really tell, is he smiling or is it anxiety? Yeah. And it, really fitting for this kind of idea. I think it's 46 or something like that. And so one of the things that we did, or that I came up with for the class, was, okay, since there's this ambiguity and you're already reading about this time period, you have a sense of what's going on, think and write down in French, what do you think this person is saying? Yeah. And so they did that individually, and then they broke into groups and then used those lines and then came up with a poem. Oh, wow. That they arranged on the floor of the museum. Yeah. So that communally, in, say, a group of 5 or 6, they together captured a lot of what they thought that person was saying. And then we expanded that into a discussion of how what they said reflected what they had learned in the classroom and what they knew about the time period, while giving them a little bit more information about the artist and the process of that art and how that reflected that as well.
Can you tell us a little bit about some best practices or ideas that you have for instructors to make use of art in class? Absolutely.
So I would say one of the best things to think about is have a reason to be at the museum. Yeah. And that it can be as simple as, I want to get the students out of the classroom and I want to get them, show them that the Johnson exists.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is an absolutely wonderful reason to bring your students to the museum. And we have everything between that and people who come repeatedly or even hold their class at the museum every single week and have multiple written assignments that are based on the art that we have available. So certainly having a reason to be at the museum, and what I mean by that is it should tie into what you're doing in class. A continuation or maybe a different way to explore the same topic, as opposed to it's a field trip. Right. Because I've seen, students' eyes just glaze over when they're like, oh, wait, this doesn't count. And I don't really know why I'm here. Yeah. And maybe they're not interested. And I could be incredibly interested and the instructor could be incredibly interested in something. No guarantee that the student is going, especially if they don't know why they're there. So integrate it into the syllabus in some way, have any reason to be there. And I have all sorts of things online. If you go to museum.cornell.edu and you go to the education tab on the Johnson Museum's website for faculty and instructors, I have all sorts of resources available, suggested, literally best practices, tips, what to do if your class is really quiet, suggested activities, informal activities to do in the galleries, suggested assignments, suggested writing assignments, formal and informal, and lots of worksheets that kind of help students not only understand, say, something like visual analysis, so what I was talking about before with how to interrogate a work of art, because who knows how to do that, when you're 18 and you're walking into a museum, but also, and how to break that down, but ekphrasis and all sorts of different ways to approach art and have students have a kind of a guided experience without taking over the experience for them. So there's a whole, buffet of options that are really there to help instructors create that connection.
Are those resources only available to Cornell affiliates, or is that a public website, the educational piece?
It is public, so anyone who's interested in checking it out
Wonderful.
Can definitely look and browse through what we have. Yeah,
that's great. So the current exhibition that is going on at the Johnson Museum is called How the Light Gets In. And I was fortunate enough, I've seen it now, or parts of it 3 times. I am a repeat offender.
Excellent.
It's a wonderful exhibition, and I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about exactly what it is. We mentioned it's about the movement of people and migration, but can you tell us a little bit more about this exhibition and then how that could be integrated into language classrooms?
Sure. The show itself takes a contemporary look at migration. So migration and contemporary art. It has 2 main focal points. One is the refugee crisis in Europe, and the other one is the U.S.-Mexico border. So the show also looks at how migration has been formed, current migration has been formed over centuries by things like colonialism, slavery, that kind of thing. And so it's really amazing to see works that I think engage a viewer on a very personal register without sensationalizing or aestheticizing the violence and the hardship that comes along with a lot of migration. I would say what's really wonderful is that so many of the works in the show slow down our looking process and engage us in a way that's very different than reading about migration in the news, seeing social media, those images that we all kind of know in the back of our head and the things that have happened that we know, and they kind of, pass through and maybe we remember them and maybe we don't. And I think there's so many beautiful works in this show that really give insight into people's experience and focus on people, ideas, and processes that are often hidden or interstitial or somehow marginalized in a really poetic and beautiful and concentrated way. So I think that's what the show does really well.
And the show runs through the end of this fall semester, is that correct?
Yes. So it is, all of our shows always run on a semester schedule so that anyone who is interested in a show knows 100% it will still be up. Even if you want to take students the last day of class, it is still there for you. I think what's special about How the Light Gets In particular is it has 56 different artists from all sorts of, or more than that, from all sorts of different countries, lots of different perspectives, and so much of the work engages with or otherwise shows language. It's literally in another language, or I think shows the importance of language and creating the language. To understand and to accommodate human migration, basically. I was having a conversation with Professor Jolene Rickard about this, and she has a wonderful work in the show called Gaia-Conyo Return, and the importance of language in that piece is really remarkable. And the idea of how language can also promote understanding and also make room. If I know a few words in another language, I'm open or understanding in a way that I haven't been before. So it's a really remarkable work.
Wonderful. Well, if you are in the area, definitely come to the Johnson Museum and check out this exhibition. For more information, you can just go to museum.cornell.edu.
Terrific. So before we sign off, we'd like to ask you to share your favorite word in a language you speak or have learned, are learning, want to learn. So I'm ready to hear it.
Well, I have so many. I was thinking about this, and it's really hard to pick. But I am going to go with a word that I learned very recently at an event that we put on at the museum. We have a series happening that's called 3 Migrations That Have Shaped Ithaca. And the first one was focused on the Cayuga Nation. And I had used that verbiage and learned in the process that Cayuga is a mistranslation and a mispronunciation of the actual word, which is Gayaconyo. So that is my favorite word. And I actually... I believe that Professor Rickard also found for her students that she's teaching a class on Gayaconyo language with Steve Henhock. And
both friends of our podcast.
And I believe she found a wonderful app that you can actually, if you just search Cayuga on the App Store, and I downloaded it, I've been perusing it. And so I think it's just exactly.
We have it.
And I think, one thing that was said at that event was there is a thought that maybe for like Cayuga Street, is it? So for Cayuga Street, that there would be signage that has Gayaconyo. And I thought, how amazing would that be? How meaningful to just have that language out in public like that.
Yeah. I remember when Jolene was on the podcast, she talked a fair bit about how acknowledging language helps acknowledge people in a space and how important that is, especially for a culture that, historically has been erased from a lot of the spaces that were theirs. So.
Yeah, I mean, that was very present, I think, at the speakers in that event, really reinforced that. And I thought to myself, this is not only just fantastic to know, but it really shows you how you can keep learning languages throughout your life. Yeah. And they have kind of different meaning and significance as you learn them, throughout your life. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you so much for speaking of language with us today, Leah.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Awesome.
Next week, Magda Weatherspoon and Tess Wheelwright will join us in the studio. They are collaborating on an exciting project to teach languages in prisons.
Listen in to learn more about Cornell's prison education program from Tess and how Magda is teaching Arabic. Until then,
Auf Wiederhören!
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu or look for Cornell LRC on Facebook and Twitter.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelica Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.